Yes.
In the section of the Book of Mormon, it talked about the coins relative.
Ask the question just a little louder, please.
I'll repeat it.
The section of the Book of Mormon talks about coins, their relative values, and what's some of the materials that those coins were made of. Has there been any significant archaeological finds that would correlate or corroborate that description of coins?
There is no description of coins in the Book of Mormon. The only mention of coins is in the heading of a chapter in Alma, but the word is not in the text. That's an editorial. That was Orson Pratt, really, who put that word coin in. There are no coins in Mesoamerica. There was money. That's items of value. A coin is a stamped item of a standard value. You know, a quarter is a quarter. But money can be a lump of salt or precious feathers or any of a number of other kinds of things that somebody will say, oh, you give me that and I'll give you something for it. So there's money that's referred to, but there are no coins referred to. So we should not expect to find any. As a matter of fact, there were no coins in Jerusalem when Lehi left. They were not invented and minted until after he left. So if we found some, we would have to think in terms of their being invented in America independently. Fortunately, there are none to worry about. Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you mentioned Orson Pratt. Orson also insisted on having a number of footnotes in the early editions of the Book of Mormon up until, I guess it was about 1920.
1920 edition eliminated them.
So, not to disparage that great man, but his contributions have certainly slowed down the rank and file of the church in understanding or helping them to understand where the lands of the Book of Mormon may have been.
We can't hear this conversation. I guess it's interesting.
He's concerned. He feels that Orson Pratt's contributions, that is his editorial setup of the 1879 edition of the Book of Mormon, was influential for many years, 20, 30 years, and that while he was not always accurate, as a matter of fact, he was frequently inaccurate in his comments or footnotes, that the point being made was that the effect of his making those footnotes was to let readers, general readers in the church, think they knew what shouldn't be known, and is held back the further consideration that should have been. And I think that's correct. Oh, you had a question?
Didn't Jack West say that he got a copper chisel that was as powerful as tempered steel?
I don't know what he said, and I'm glad I don't. He hadn't the slightest idea what he was talking about on any subject. If there are any relatives here, I didn't say that. I went east instead of west. Were there other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Would you comment a little more on the use of metal? Because they talk about swords. Nephi said he made metal tools to build the ship.
Yeah?
Have we not found that they had metal helmets and stuff?
No. No, we have not found. He made metal tools in southern Arabia to build the ship. Whether he ever made any in the New World, he taught his people about working gold and silver and other ores, and possibly he made some tools at first, but apparently it was not passed on successfully.
How about their swords?
Swords, well, there's been a good deal written about swords, and there were very effective swords in Mesoamerica, but they're not metal.
They're obsidian, aren't they?
They're a wooden club-like device with a slit worked in the side, and then chips of sharp obsidian glued in so they wouldn't come out, and so both sides had these obsidian chips. And according to the Spaniards, Spaniards called them swords. They just said the native swords, and they were as equal to metal swords. As a matter of fact, in several cases, the native Mesoamericans cut off the head of a horse with one blow with those things, and they were deadly. So they didn't need any better swords than they had. By the way, John, I don't know if you've noticed this, but Ann Cyphers published the detailed pictures of the stone art at Sorenson, and they show the obsidian swords there. That's going back to 1300 BC. Almost identical to the ones that were used by the Aztecs 3,000 years later. So they were good enough. They couldn't want any better. Yes?
He talks about making swords like the sword of Laban. He used that as his model, I guess. Would you address that?
Well, he also said that he built a temple like the Temple of Solomon, except, he added, they didn't have the same materials. So it was kind of like the Temple of Solomon, but it wasn't like the Temple of Solomon exactly. So perhaps the swords were like the sword of Laban in the same sense. I don't know. We have to ask Nephi when we see him. Really? Yes.
Could you comment about Hagoth as to where it comes from?
There's very little to say. He built a couple of ships, and it's quite clear to me that he did the building at the Isthmus of Tehuantepec in southern Mexico, and he sailed northward to take colonists north. How far would they have gone? Well, I think 200 miles. It seemed like a long way. It made more sense to go by ship, part of the way anyway, than it did to trudge over very mountainous terrain. But I don't see them sailing out to sea, and I think probably Hagoth and his ships sank near the coast of the state of Oaxaca. I don't think they got to Polynesia. I was a Polynesian missionary, and I grew up on the myth that Hagoth landed in Hawaii or somewhere. There's not the slightest reason to think so. Yes.
In several of the museums in Guatemala City, I noticed that there have been at times displays, for example, displays of written material, where the museum has indicated that writing began in that area on the west, or maybe actually the south coast of Guatemala, and they mentioned that it started at 600 BC. In another museum,